This is Farrokh Alemi, and I wanted to talk to you about how we could use natural language processing or other text processing of social media to predict whether a person is likely to commit suicide. In recent years, in the past 3 decades, there has been significant progress in classification of comments on social media. There are about 30 different articles showing that we can do so. And I'm not going to go into the methodologies used, but I'm going to discuss how these progress that has been made can now be used to classify a patient as being suicidal. What progress has been made, you might ask? It is now feasible to classify social media posts. That clearly has been established in the literature. And secondly, context matters. It's not just keyword matches that matters, but context of those keywords matters. So for example, if we have a message that says I am happy, then clearly this person is not suicidal. But if he's but the word happy can be in a different context have a quite different meaning when the patient says I am knife happy. So what has been shown to date is that there are different approaches and that these different statistical or phrase matching uh, pretty much achieve similar accuracy results in the 80 area under the curve of around 80% to 90%. One way of getting the context of the word into our analysis is to rely on the longest matched phrase. So in this context, the prior words set the context of future uh, words, subsequent words. So for example, knife sets the context of happy as a different kind of a message than the word happy without knife implies. In this kind of matching, we have to ignore statistical methods that might have more accurate, informative uh, information. So, statistical methods are relying on the frequency of the words. We are relying for context, we are relying on the length of the phrase. So if we find a phrase that's 4 letters, 4 words, but predictive, and we have seen it only once in suicidal patients, we would rely on that 4 words more because that has better context than a phrase that is repeated maybe hundreds of times, but it's only of the length of 3. What phrase matching implies is that we will rely on the longest phrase, not on the probability of the phrase being associated with suicide. Our data show that matching to the longest phrase is best only in short comments, and documents that are long or hundreds of words or even 50, 60 sentences that are 50, 60 words have typically problematic matches. So statistical models are best in long comments and matching to the longest phrase is best only in short comments. Our data also shows that when you are matching to short comments, you can easily learn correct classification for next time by adding one case to the training set. But if you're trying to learn in a statistical model, you have to add hundreds of new cases to the statistical model so that it would be accurate next time. So up to now, we have just pointed out that it is possible to classify comments in social media in terms of whether or not they are suicide-related comments. But our purpose is not to classify comments. Our purpose is to classify a person. And this brings up a whole new problem for us because now there are very limited studies that show how we should go around classifying a person. Classifying a person requires analyzing the comments that we have classified as suicide-related over time. For example, if we want to predict risk in the next 2 weeks, then we have to look at history of the comments of the patient and predict the probability of risk in the next 2 weeks, and every time period changes this probability. So one way of approaching this problem is social media as a text streaming, and there has been progress made in the field on how text streaming will work. So the classical text incremental clustering in streamed text relies on k-means clustering, and outliers emerge as clusters as at each step a different clustering occurs on the segment that is new, and there is a significant time decay if the cluster doesn't emerge in a certain time period, then that cluster is ignored over time and other clusters might show up. There is a number of studies done since 1960s all the way till 2005 and 2010. So the algorithm that we propose is based on 3 steps. One, to assess probability of each extracted phrase indicating the risk of suicide. So that is what we have known to now that we can do, and that tells us that social media can be classified for each posting. What is the probability of that being suicide related? So how do we do this? So we look at probability of suicide at baseline, typically based on patient's medical history. Then we look at the probability that a particular phrase occurs, and we look also at how often this phrase occurs among the people who have committed suicide or who have attempted suicide. This probability is then analyzed in subsequent steps in our model. So the first thing that we do, we decay these comments. So older comments indicating that the probability is high is not so much important anymore, especially if they have been followed with newer comments that show the person is happy. So that decay process ignores history and tries to rely on more recent data in predicting whether the patient is at risk. And then we create a control limits for the probability, and those control limits are based on risk-adjusted p-charts, and there is significant papers that we have already published in this area. So let's take a look at an example. So here we see the probability of associated with various comments. I've just made this up, but I want to show you how these steps are carried out. So these probabilities are from various statements that the patient has made. And now we are at the 9th time period, and we don't know whether we should give is this probability too high for this person? Is this probability too low? What should we do about this person? Notice that on the 3rd and 4th time period, the person's probability is declining, and then it goes back up, and maybe being at 80% chance for this particular patient is historical pattern, and we don't need to alert the parents or the clinician constantly that this person is at risk. So we need to know if is this a new risk that we are facing, or is this the historical pattern or expected risk that the person has. So the second step is to decay the risk by using the formula that I had provided to you earlier. And here we see that older items are decayed further than newer items. And the third step is to add in control limits using risk-adjusted control limits. And now we see that the earlier part, the person is not at risk, but 3 points at 7, 8, and 9, the person is at elevated risk, and therefore at this time period we should still alert the clinician or the parent of this teenager that the person is at risk. What I have presented to you is a procedure for predicting probability of suicide of a person from posts that this person makes in social media using a combination of text processing and a statistical process control.